know the last point that I had mentioned. Yes, Tracy? That basically this is a relatively peaceful takeover. That's correct. And I'm going to go over several aspects of it. Number one, when the Arab Muslims take over Iran, Arabic will not supplant Farsi as a language. So the Persians will in fact keep Farsi as its language. They will learn elements of Arabic in order to read the Quran, but for the most part, Farsi will not be supplanted like the Coptic language would be in Egypt by Arabic. Okay, so Farsi will stay intact. Why is this important? Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that if you basically keep your indigenous language, you keep a large residue of your culture with it. And remember, too, that Farsi was a written language and spoken language and used for administration way before the Arab Bedouins even had a written Arabic script. So therefore, its antiquity gave it a certain amount of staying power. And another reason why this is important is Farsi will also continue to differentiate Persian from their new Arab Muslim overlords. Okay, language is going to be a difference even when Iran becomes basically incorporated within the crescent moon of Islam. If you are a non-Arab convert to Islam, you are referred to as Mawali. Now, Mawali status is going to make Iranian Muslims feel secondary. In other words, it's going to make them feel like a tertiary, secondary Muslims. Okay? So that is going to be very, very important because the Iranian Muslims will feel like they're second-tier Muslims, that Arab Muslims will get privileges over them. Is that feeling true? Yes, it is. In the initial phase of Islam, the Arabs are going to rule the areas they conquered as conquered territories. Islam will filter down to the population, but at the beginning, Islam is very much an Arab phenomenon. It's going to take a while for Mawali to achieve the same status as the Arab Muslims. The next point that I want to bring up with regard to the results of the Arab Muslim conquest of Iran is that Arabs will effectively sever Mesopotamia from Persian rule. The Arab Muslims will effectively cut off Mesopotamia from Persian rule and influence. So basically, after the Arab Muslim takeover of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, you're going to see the paths of Iran and Iraq, for the most part, become divergent. Whereas before, Mesopotamia bore the stamp of Iranian culture, especially under the Sassanids and the Arsacids. Okay? Now, one area that the Arabs are going to have a great deal of effective control over will be a province. Yes?
Around what years is that?
Remember I told you that the conquest of Iran takes place in 642 to 643. And we talked about the first battle, which takes away a chunk of Iran. That's the Battle of Khorasan in 631. The Battle of Nahavand is in 643. Okay? So that's really the year in which the Arab Muslim armies forced Iran to submit. Now, the southwestern part of Iran is Khorasan province. Sometimes you may see it spelled differently. It's located right here, flanking what would be the northern side of the Persian Gulf, the northeastern bank. This province is very important, obviously, for its access to the Persian Gulf and to the Indian Ocean. But it's very important in today's world because Khuzestan is the biggest oil-producing province of Iran. Of course, that didn't come into being a factor back then because you didn't have the internal combustion engine and henceforth no need for fossil fuels, petroleum.
Is it more in the Hormuz?
I'm sorry?
Is it more in the Hormuz?
About the same. About the same. Yeah. But Khuzestan is basically Iran's cash cow today for petroleum resources. And that was the part that was fought over very fiercely during the original Gulf War between Iraq and Iran in 1980 to 1988, which the United States tried to resolve peacefully by helping both sides kill each other. As Henry Kissinger said, you know, the more of our enemies that die on each side, the better. And that's the guy that gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Will Be. I wish I could get Peace Prize for mining in the Haiphong Harbor and dropping bombs on Hanoi. That's what they gave to Kissinger. In my opinion, he's a war criminal, but that's just me. Now, basically, I didn't forget it. I don't want to mention it. Yeah, he basically supported the human rights violators like the Suharto regime, which were incredibly horrible and committed all sorts of ethnic atrocities in East Timor, which the United States did virtually nothing about to help support that regime. Now, with regard to the Arab Muslim conquest of Iran, some cities will rebel. Some cities will rebel when they understood their tributary status to be permanent. In other words, what's happening is some of the Iranians figured that the Arab Muslims came as liberators, freeing them from the harsh taxation and discriminatory, religious discriminatory policies of Sassanids. When they realized that the Arab Muslims didn't come as liberators but came as occupiers, then they would become a little bit distraught and they would begin to rebel. And this was complicated by the fact that Iran was not conquered all at once. It was not conquered all at once. Many areas of Iran were bypassed by the original Arab Muslim armies and had to be subdued later. So in effect, what happened was you would have flying columns of Arab Muslims go out into the northeast areas of Iran, but they didn't take over every city along the way. They just took over the major cities along the way. Okay? Now, with regard to the other aspects of the results of the Arab Muslim conquest of Iran, first of all, the areas that were bypassed and had to be subdued later was the province of Fars, the original Persia, and the Elborz principalities. Elborz mean flanking the mountains. Now, what this basically meant is that warfare would technically continue even after supposedly